Okay, countdown. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another session. I know I've been in a lot of sessions today, but I just feel like so passionate about a lot of these topics that I was like, I have to be in here, and especially the topic we're going to be talking about today and at this panel is something that a lot of people ask questions about, and it's one of the key pillars and most important aspects of nomading that people try to figure out their finances. How do I, because I feel like a part of digital nomading is like that switching from a normal job to to become a self-disciplined person includes the finances as well, and figuring out your taxes on multiple aspects. And talking about these two key things, we have Shlomo Freund, who is one of the most well-known finance experts. And welcome and thank you for being in this panel.
Pleasure being here. Thank you for inviting Erkan. Thank you.
And
Yeah, nice to be here.
Thank you. And we have John. He's going to be talking about taxes. And so why don't we just get started with a bit of an intro of, let's start with you, Shlomo. What do you do? What is your expertise on? How did you start living your digital nomad life and working remotely? And yeah, I would love to share more about you with our audience.
Okay, so I've been an entrepreneur for the past 17 or 18 years now, being always doing side projects. Even when I had a day job, it's kind of something inevitable for me, and build several projects, several companies. Some of them succeeded, some of them crashed, as always for entrepreneurs. At the past 5 years, I've been running Free Financial Self, which is basically I do financial coaching for remote workers because I know this audience. I know how to approach basically you guys. I live this lifestyle. We are location independent family from 2015. I have two daughters, and we travel. We're not full-time nomads, but we do like every trip is like 2-3 months. Then we're back to our base in Israel. Then we do it again. So that what fits us right now. Except of that financial coaching, which I do with one-on-ones and courses and workshops and speaking. I also do niche website investing, which is another topic, but I see this as an investment. This is why it's also related to finances from my perspective. That's it.
So much for the intro, Shlomo. And how about you, John? Would love to share with our audience of your background and what you do, and most importantly, how did you start with your digital nomad life?
Yeah, well, for me, a 15-year career, 10 years in the corporate world, 5 years in the startup world. Always passionate for travel and languages. I speak 6 languages, 4 of them fluently, learning a 7th now in Portuguese. So I always had a real kind of deep curiosity about the world. And then when I met my wife a number of years ago, she also had a deep love of travel as well. When we came up with our first startup idea, it was called Culture Me. It was basically an intercultural app that you download when you're traveling, and you use culture models to compare your culture to the culture you're traveling to, use culture videos by locals and visitors. That ended up winning Best Travel Technology in the World at the Global Youth Travel Awards, and we used that to try and travel the world. So we were basically digital nomading for the last, I guess, 6 years. Eldest daughter Rosa is 5. She's been to 25 countries, for example. She's she's born in Amsterdam. She lived in 6 months in Phuket, can still do like the Thai greeting. Then spent time living in Ireland in Portuguese, learning Portuguese. So that's for me one of the interesting aspects as a parent of how can you do it, what is possible, the different solutions that are coming around. And essentially, Culture Me, pivot to business travel. That's where it was taking us, and unfortunately when we launched the API in 2019 got a great reaction, but then COVID came along and wiped out business travel. So that first startup failed. Learned a ton of lessons on the back of it. Then basically came up with Work From Anywhere team about a year and a half ago. So basically, the Work Finder team is a platform to help, well, primarily companies navigate the tax risks of working hard from anywhere. Basically, that's the core of what we do. But we do, get to speak on the topics of digital nomad visas and what are the things to do and watch out for. And of course, being a digital myself, I've had to eat my own dog food. I've had to go through the process of living in different countries, dealing with the tax guys, the international employment lawyers, and all the different risks around that side of it. So happy to share any lessons learned along the way.
Love it. I mean, it's so we've had a few questions in previous sessions as well about traveling with family, and I believe this is going to be a great opportunity. I'm gonna ask a few questions for you guys, since both of you travel with family, with kids, which is you're one of the pioneers of this, because this is just now becoming more of a thing where people actually take their kids and like travel with their family as digital nomads, and I think it is one of the best things you can do for your children as well, because they're going to be exposed to multiple cultures. And speaking of languages, I love languages. Like I'm at 5 languages, getting there, and it's so good because I feel like
I'm behind. I'm at 4.
yeah.
Okay, but we're multi-language here. Okay.
Love it. Yeah, we should catch up on John. Like just
But
a couple
isn't it
more.
funny, Erkan and Shlomo, how by speaking another language, it gives you access to a completely different mindset? For me,
It's amazing.
experiencing it just plugs into a different creative mindset, way of approaching life, connecting dots differently. Isn't it fantastic just having that access to that? And for me, being able to give it to my kids, for me, is another gift as well.
It's
I totally
absolutely
agree.
that's it. Like just being able to speak the languages, you could realize the difference from when you talk to someone in English. Like let's say you go to Italy and you talk to them in English, and then you talk to them in Italian. It's a different bond. It's a different way of expressing yourself. It's a complete different experience that you understand the culture better. You understand their approach towards life in general, which is my favorite thing actually. I feel like food and the language are two things that you get to understand and get to know the culture best.
Yeah, big time.
Okay, so this
Yeah,
is not
big
a
time.
finances and taxes
Yeah,
session
we're
anymore.
switching
This is
into
something else.
Let's change the title real quick. Love it. Like it's just that's the thing when you talk with digital nomads. Like you just there's so much to talk about. You're like passionate about literally anything and everything that relates to travel. So actually, let's then just straight jump into what we're here for. Shoma, I would love to hear, because I feel like I make a lot of financial mistakes. Like just not being disciplined and this and that. But before I say how I feel about my finances, I would love to hear, what are a few common mistakes that you see in people that are working remotely in their finances. Now I know there's different backgrounds to it and everything, but I'm sure there's a couple of things that you're like, these are must knows that people are making mistakes to begin with, or what are the tips that you could share with our audience about it?
So I think the biggest hurdle is when people are sometimes constantly moving, or every few months, and different prices, different currencies. They have even different incomes. We spoke about being an entrepreneur. That's not a stable income a lot of the time. And what's happening is that people needs to go through this up and down and cope with it. So however, they don't plan ahead for what's going to happen. And by planning, I don't mean for the next month or the next 6 months or the next year. I'm talking about very long-term planning. And then what you are able to do to solve this is basically reverse engineer to where you are today and understand how much you need to save, to invest, probably in what assets, to reach all these goals that you want if you want to be in different places. Now, definitely life changes all the time, but you can at least have some kind of a frame and work with that instead of just being all over the place. The second thing, must say it's a theory of mine, but I'm not sure, but you still see this from time to time, is that when people are traveling, they're on vacation mode. And when they're on vacation mode, they spend. So people might make a lot of money, but at the end of the day, they don't save, definitely not invest, but they don't save almost anything for their future and what they want for themselves. So it's basically living the day, and that's it. And that's of course not sustainable long term.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That's a very on point aspect of finances, and like I could so much relate when I see like on finances. So John, when it comes to taxes, I've like working on digital nomad visas. I work with a few governments on that, and working on digital nomad visas, it's been the main one of the main aspects that we've talked about quite profoundly with the governments has been the taxes. I would love to hear from you. Like, what do you see the best practices, and what are the challenges with the taxes for digital nomads?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I mean, the first thing is that you've got to remember we're at an inflection point in human history where work is being disassociated from a physical location, and that has just profound implications for how we see countries, how we see offices, how we see work, how we see companies. If you think of it back for a second, Eric, in the 1990s, a lot of companies used corporation tax to attract companies to their countries. And it worked very successfully for a number of countries. You look at, for example, Ireland is just one of many. But what's really interesting now is that now it's actually looking at your personal taxes and how you manage that and how you can attract the people. Because if you can attract the people, you've actually nearly got as much, if not a better chance of attracting the right companies. And I think digital nomad visas, the taxation of digital nomads do fit into that. And it's a very challenging one because it's a kind of equilibrium. If you push it too much, you're going to push out the locals, and the locals are going to get quite annoyed. You're going to gentrify places, and you need to be very careful of the balance with the local people, local culture, and a whole sense of fairness and equity. But I think when it comes to digital nomad visas, there's a lot of misconceptions. I mean, the first thing is that some countries launch a digital nomad visa and it's a pure marketing tool. It's not well thought through. They haven't even considered the tax aspect of it. It's not well promoted. It's not done in a cross-departmental, cross-functional way. Country. In some cases, they haven't even consulted properly with the taxation authorities. In other cases, that when they have it done, they haven't made very clear what exactly are the rules. So, for example, I give you one example that's a real area that's not very well understood, is that some digital nomad visas don't charge local income tax, provided you're not working for a local employer. Some do, provided that you trigger the local tax residency there. But for example, not many people are actually even aware that a digital nomad visa, for example, will mean in some cases you don't have to pay local income tax, but that says nothing about capital gains. If you decided to sell shares while you were working abroad on a digital nomad visa for a particular period of time, you could potentially trigger some of those risks. So there's a bunch of these have to be, further evolved, further thought through. We're just at the start of this. If 2 years ago, these didn't even exist. But I think it's more than just digital nomads. It's remote workers in general, because digital nomads are a small subsection of the movement, and the people that are moving all the time, every month or every couple of months, the remote workers are a much bigger challenge, a much bigger market. People that, for example, have a base in the US but want to work remotely for maybe 3 or 4 months a year. There's going to be a lot of those. There's going to be not a huge amount of people that are willing to up sticks, leave their whole life behind them, and move around every single month or every 2 months. But there's going to be a lot of people that want to go and spend 3 or 4 months working abroad in a particular country. So this is causing a real friction point for taxation authorities all around the world, and I'm interested to see where it ends up.
Absolutely. It's been quite a challenge for a lot of people, of course, and especially I could resonate with the United States, and Eritrea, which are
And
the two
Israel.
countries. Israel taxes you out, really?
When you are a resident of Israel, there is always a tax treaty between countries. So, but you always pay the rest to Israel, unless you are not a resident for a few years. It's pretty hard to be out of the tax residency in Israel. So it's not as harsh as the US, but pretty close.
Wow, I didn't know that. I only knew about Eritrea and the US about taxing you. Of course, the US has the
No matter
Foreign
where you are, yeah.
Act. Yeah, you still like you can if you make less than 100K for the US, like you can you don't have to pay as much, I guess. But then again, still Uncle Sam,
Loves you.
IRS, high five. Yeah, exactly. So um, I'm gonna just shift here between taxes and finances. By the way, just a little comment that I really want to read from our attendees. Emily says, "I believe that any culture, it is actually much more than food, even language. Food is only one of the pillars." Couldn't agree
Yeah, well
more,
said, Emily.
Emily. It's exactly. It's just that entrance to that culture. Like you first get to
First
interact with
touch point.
exactly with the language and the food. That's the initial aspect to it, and then you just get to into an ocean of things and experiences of different cultures. And so going back to finances now, um, when you set goals, Shlomo, and financially, whether it is you're an entrepreneur or you are um, a remote worker, a freelancer, which freelancer is kind of an entrepreneur at the same time because you're running, your own business, but you're like a one-person business
Yeah.
usually. So when you're looking at the finances, or people um, you know, coming and approaching to you. Um, what are, now earlier we talked about like the main issues and whatnot, but I'm looking into like, how does a successful or like, I don't want to say successful, but like a person who you're like, okay, you have the right mindset to manage your finances. I don't know if what I'm trying to go makes sense. Like I'm looking for
Uh,
like if there is I'm sure there's not like a specific answer for this. What is the right mindset for a person to do their finances? I hear, for example, Gary Vee. I watch him a lot, and he's like,
uh-huh.
don't buy $5 coffees. Like just don't buy it. Wait for your goals. Do you have any
So,
specifics about the mindset?
uh, so there is a roadmap that I work with my clients, and it has 4 steps. And at the 5th step, which is kind of the end goal, it says there is this yellow box, and it says financial freedom. And when I'm talking to clients, so this financial freedom can be different for any person. It can be really anything. Okay, it's just like this word that everybody use, but it's really different. Uh, but I'm looking at it a more holistic way. So it's not only finances, it's also life goals. So talking about this, mentioning this roadmap, the first thing that people should do is really think about their future and design their lifestyle. The longer term, the better. It's kind of thinking about your goals, not the financial goals, just the personal goals. Where do you want to live, either long term, how fast you want to move between countries, where you want to go, things like that. That will create the frame of your vision, where you want to go. Then the next step is basically upgrading your financial knowledge. And I'm not talking about getting your college degree in economics. I'm talking about a few basic terms, 20% of the knowledge giving you 80% of the success, or what you can achieve. So that's the second thing. And then when you have your vision, the basic financial knowledge, then you can start going and control your numbers, understanding what is your net worth, understand how to calculate your cash flow, and really gather all this information and track it. I do it monthly, but people really need to get into the rhythm to know what's their trajectory. And then at the end of the way, going to that financial freedom is the planning stage. Okay, take all this information that you got from the first 3 stages and break it down into an execution plan. What you need to do. Open an account with a broker, decide on which ETFs to invest in, how much should I put in this peer-to-peer investment. Like, really do all these steps, and then you'll be better off with your finances, because you're really making this connection between finances and your life. It's not only about the money, it's about this holistic a view of where am I going, and then let's make my finances match this. I don't know if
Totally.
that answered your question.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, I mean, aligning your goals, your life goals, and your life mindset with your finances is such a deep, like, it's not just pretty straightforward, sophisticated process where you need to understand your goals clearly and
It
set
takes
them
time.
properly. Exactly. I totally can resonate with that. Like, I can really relate to it. That it, like, my financial goals, like, or like financial strategies have shifted as my goals have also, shaped a little better, and I knew what I want, because life is just about figuring out what you actually want sometimes, and then once you're locked into things that you're like, okay, this is my goal, then you build on top of it.
I think that the most common question I get, I think the second one is taxes, but the first one is what should I invest in? And when people ask me this, I'm telling them, you really need to think about your goals. You're not like anyone else. You don't have the same amount of money. You're maybe like risk or risk averse or any of that. You have different goals, different access to different kinds of investments. It's really different. So you need to go through all this process I just mentioned to really understand what you need to do. It's not like one size fits all. There is no right answer for what should I invest in right now. You need to go through that process personally by yourself.
And what better chance to, like, it's just amazing to have somebody to consult you, to walk you through that, which with an extreme experience. And next, actually, after I ask the question for John, I want to deep dive into your mistakes, and like what you've done wrong. So I'll give you a few minutes to think about that, because
Okay.
I'd love to hear those perspectives. John, what I wanted to first compliment you on is the website of your company.
Thank
What a
you. Thank you.
great
Appreciate it.
resource. What a great resource. It's my reference point in many instances, when I talk to company, when we talk about, different aspects, digital nomading. I majority of the time I do guys with about that. So I would hear me?
I can, yeah, I can hear you
Well,
perfect. Yeah, no,
Okay, perfect.
are going to appreciate the feedback. Appreciate the feedback. Well, look, for me, a big part of what we were doing is that, a year and a half ago, we could see there was going to be this work from anywhere market. There's people that would want to work from anywhere. And of course, we've been digital nomads ourselves. But essentially, it was people that go abroad for more than 7 days, but less than 365 days. And so you still have all the heavy issues of tax. If you're only going somewhere for a day or two, very often it doesn't cause huge issues for companies. But as soon as you go abroad for, especially more than a month or 2 months or 3 months, it just amplifies all of these different risks. And so for us, what we've always tried to do is to try to demystify it and explain the risks and the challenges in either a user-friendly way or with user-friendly tools. And actually, that's what I'm going to share with you now. If I just share it in the chat, I'm going to share with you the decision-making process that we did for going to Portugal. So in our case, we had a number of factors that were important for us, but some of these things will be relevant for everyone. And essentially the framework that we did when we were deciding to go, we looked at, for example, every single country in the world. We looked at their population. We looked at their Nomad List top 100 ranking. Nomad List is a great resource. Also CEO World Best to Raise Kids, high risk country, crime rate by country, average temperature, healthcare ranking, cost of living, but also things like, for example, double taxation agreement. Shlomo mentioned earlier, it's really important if you're going to a country that has a double taxation agreement, that it does reduce the risk. If it doesn't have a double taxation agreement, it means you can potentially, get taxed double in what you're doing. You want to try and avoid that. But looking at countries that have a wealth tax as well, looking at the aspects of the balancing corporation tax and income tax as well. And there's a lot of really good resources as well that I'm happy to share with people that come to us that might be helpful as well. Things like, for example, VisaDB has a really good resource of tax rates by country, and they've got a more detailed list of it as well, of the tax rates, of the different types of tax rates you have by country as well. And then on top of it then as well, we've got also the digital nomad visas as well. That's another resource. So I'm just plugging a bunch of these. I've a whole bunch more as well that I'd be happy to recommend. I will add more as I go along during the conversation. But for us, the great thing I would say, Erkan, is there's so many more tools and resources available. And if we can contribute as part of that, very happy to. But for us, I think that's the great thing. There's so many more resources available compared to 5 or 10 years ago, because there's so many more people looking to do this.
I would love to stop for a second in this, and like I would love to just see if I could share screen and just take a brief look at what you just shared down there as to the decision making. You guys can see my screen?
Yeah.
So like this is really impressive, like how you put all this together, and did a deep dive into like the destinations, and very well thought, and analytical decision making, to be honest, which is, I mean, sets a great example, I believe, and it, honestly, this is something that's just like so valuable. I would, it would help me personally to look into it. These are some useful information for me to on which destination I want to go to.
Well, that's a great thing though, Erkan. I mean, this took me like about 2 days to put together. I'm very data oriented. I'm very
only
analytical.
2 days.
And yeah,
Yeah, it seems like-
it took me 2 days. For me, I do this. I build algorithms. I've done coding stuff like this of databases for quite a while. So for me, I'm happy to. As soon as anybody, I share. I had some calls with people that said, oh, "Show me how you did things," and I showed them this, and that this is great. So I've made it open source. I've made it anyone can access it. And hopefully it can help. But the great thing about it is that now, like the resources I'm sharing, everyone can do this for themselves. And I think it's worth doing this, once every 3 or 4 years, doing something like this for yourself, and you deciding what are the factors that are important to you. It could be cultural. It could be, there might be other aspects that you may be looking. It could be like nightlife. It could be whatever it is that's specific to you, that's passionate, that you really, really want. Maybe you want to be places that are beside the sea. I've no idea. You decide, the algorithm of life that works for you. But this is what we did to decide on how to go to Portugal.
I love it. This is really, really, really cool resources. I want to stop for a second and answer a few questions we have from our attendees, and then I'll jump back to what we were talking about. So Emily has a question, says, hi, Shlomo and John. What strategy you would advise for digital nomad people having several different passports and residences? I think this definitely relates to Shlomo. So she says, when they are planning the remote work outside of current residency and digital nomad lifestyle, are you considering this factor working with your customers? So in her example, she's got 2 passports, one Canadian and one Israel, and she's got Mexican residency. I would like to start with John, given the fact that you're more knowledgeable about taxation, and then Shlomo, maybe you'd have anything to add about her being from Israel. So
sure,
with Israel passport.
Very, very simply, funny, people often talk about taxes, but actually step one is looking at your passport, looking at where you're eligible for a visa, because you can talk all day about taxes, but if you're not eligible to even go there, well, then forget it. So step one is looking at, for your situation, okay, what are the passports you have that allow you to be able to go there? That's like step one. The next obvious step to look at would be, for example, to try and understand the tax situation in a bit more detail. It depends how long you're going for. If you're only going for, a couple of weeks, generally speaking, a tourist visa will probably be fine, unless all of a sudden you're deciding to do a huge amount of work. You have to be very careful of the visa restrictions and what you do and where you work, for example. But I think the other aspect of it that's also really interesting is looking at double taxation agreements between the different countries. So looking at the country combinations you have, you can actually go on the internet very often. You can search, you can see these double taxation agreements, you can see how they deal with it differently. They're all very specific to the country combinations. And that's, if you're going to go for a good while, I mean, if you're going to go for over like 6 months or a year, particularly if you're going to do anything funky, particularly if you have a lot of assets, particularly if you've got some very important income coming in, you can very often get a local tax advisor for a couple of $100 or maybe $1,000 to be able to give you the assurance of this is how you do it, this is what you need to do. And I think the worst thing is that if you're going to go spend, especially more than a good few months in a place, is to just think you're okay. The problem is that the following question, like one of the questions was, how can 1 or 2 months of stay trigger tax implications?
Yes.
1 or 2 days of a stay can trigger tax implications. It may be for you personally, it might not trigger a personal taxation residency for you, but guess what? If you work for a company, then the problem you have is that depending on the nature of your contract, if you're an employee, for example, let's say you work in California for just a day, guess what? You've got day one payroll obligations. You go into Canada, for example, for even 1 day as a business traveler, that employer has to track every single business traveler that's going in. You go to the UK for like a day, if you haven't gotten, let's say, a specific exemption, that has to be thought through from a payroll, let's say, deduction withholding liability. So it depends on the scenario, but also depends on the country you're going to. But it's definitely, you have to watch out. You have to know what you're stepping into, particularly if you're working for a company. I mean, I think ultimately a digital nomad does not suit working as a full-time employee for a company. You're going to be going down the work towards the contractor route, and even then, it's not like an escape hatch you can do what you want. It's trickier than that, but that hopefully gives some color.
Thank you so much. Do you have anything to add about Israel and how you handle?
So first of all, about Israel, I don't know Emily's situation, of course, with where her tax residency is and how long she's not being in Israel and how many days. So it's rather complicated. So she, of course, need to check that. And if she's coming back to Israel, to make sure that everything is set with the authority, there is something called you detach your residency. In Hebrew, it's nituk toshavut for you, Emily, if you speak Hebrew. And this one is a process that you need to go through, and then you won't pay any taxes in Israel, and it will depend where you are. In terms of your 2 passports and Mexican residency, that's wonderful. That means you have more options for investments and opportunities around the world. So that's a good thing to have. Except of the restrictions of what John mentioned about taxes, which I know less about. So that's a good thing. I want to just mention also that I uploaded the roadmap that I mentioned before, just so people would be able to see it. It's right here, so it's more a visual thing.
Yeah, if
and
you could
one more
share that for a second, if they could take a look
Was
at
it
that, would
uploaded?
be awesome.
That's
Oh,
on the
there it
chat.
is. Yes.
And another
You could
resource.
like, if you have another tab, you could hit share screen, or you want me to? I could share that for a second, real quick.
So it's not the link; it's just opening the image.
Yeah.
I copy pasted that, but don't worry about it, because I also have this on this resource here, how to be a digital nomad and feel financially stable. And this one also has this roadmap and explanation about it, so you can just read through it afterwards. So that will be easier.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I hope it answers Emily's question. And I know we had another question about taxation that was about cryptocurrencies in Portugal. John, anything to say on crypto? I know it's still pretty trending. And
yeah, of course. But look, I mean, when it comes to specific questions, specific countries, we always tend to say, listen, go and me living in Portugal, I subscribe to one of the local updates from one of the tax advisors. They've done an analysis of the state budget law for 2022, and basically, to the best of my knowledge, currently, crypto is non-taxable crypto gains are non-taxable in Portugal, provided you're not doing it on a professional basis, like trading. That's the main purpose of your job is trading in crypto. It will be, but if it's not, if it's done ad hoc, then it's currently non-taxable. That will probably change over the next 2 or 3 years, I'm guessing. But for now, it's not. And you combine that with the NHO regime in Portugal, it does make it pretty attractive.
Perfect. So if you're a trader, you actually probably will have to pay taxes. But if you're just an investor, not necessarily.
Yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, if it's ultimately your job, you're going to be taxed accordingly from a professional. Whereas if it's if you're doing it every now and again, then it's a different ballgame. Yeah,
I think it's similar in many countries. I don't think it's an exception for Portugal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So you had a minute, Stromo, to think about that, because I'm so curious to see
failures.
Can you tell us, what were your mistakes financially? Like, what are the things that you personally learned from working remotely, probably years ago when you built all this knowledge? What is something that you're
Ah,
like, one of the examples where you're like, I made this mistake financially, like I was doing this and then I changed and it made a big difference?
it's not so much about being remote, but I really, so I like looking into uh, new types of investment. It's something that I I see, I research, I learn. Eventually, I do, and eventually that gets to how I get the knowledge and then helping others. But also brings in failures. I remember a few years ago, I invested in through crowd investing platforms in Europe. I invested in 4 of them. 3 of them were fraud, and this is after I made the research, and that was that kind of hurt. Um, but I've learned that there is always this risk side that you have to acknowledge and know that no matter how much you will research, there's always an unknown, or you don't know what you don't know, and eventually you have to deal with that. So of course, um, it also depends how much money you're putting in. If that's very little or relatively little to what you're making, fine. If that's a huge one, maybe you'd want to go into more experts and more consultants and things like that. I don't know what I could have done better because I've made my research. Also, for that size of investment, that was okay. Um, the other thing is that at the last almost, yeah, 2.5 years, I started buying websites as investment and operating them. And I found out what's a good fit for me and what's a bad fit for me for what I'm looking for as a type of investment. And I found out what's the right size of website that is right for me. And just last month, beginning of August, I sold the first website that I had, the second website that I had, that I bought, and just because it was too small. It was something that was not the right fit for me. It wasn't interesting enough. I didn't like the niche. So it's kind of a process of understanding. I bought that. I did lose money on that, about 50% of this one, but again, it was rather small. But I found out, okay, these kind of websites are not a good fit. I lost on that, but that was kind of a learning process. So it's always this learning process. But I have this talk. I call it taking the plunge, how to start investing. And the mindset should be that when you fail, you actually don't fail because you're already at next level. You learned something, you made progress, you'll be better next time. People always improve, you learn, you go to the next step. So I'm okay with that. It didn't crush my life. I'm still okay. And it's part of the learning process.
So like, it's my favorite quote on this is the aspect that you just said, where if you fail, you're actually not failing, you're already at the next level. That is so true about just life in general, that I'm definitely gonna use that in some of the posts in the future. This is such a cool saying. And speaking of failures and going to the next level, John, would love to hear about your failures, because I think everybody, I don't want to call them again failure. I think like your lessons, I want to put it that way, because we've all had our ups and downs and things that have made us stronger. And I don't think John came up with this whole list in one day. It was a matter of experiences and knowledge that brought you to a point where you can actually put together all that, Excel sheet with all the details of countries and being able to analytically make that decision. So would love to hear about lessons that you went through, whether it is tax related or other.
Yeah, the lesson for me, the couple of big lessons along the way. Well, lessons in life in general, just getting into the startup. I mean, it was the best thing I ever did. Even in a failure through that, you learn so much. I'm a thousand times more resilient. Those lessons I learned in the first startup are helping me massively. You know, when it comes to taxes, for me, taxes are really, really important, but there's so much more important aspects in life to get right first. The personal aspects, what you want out of life, what you're passionate about. And it is definitely true. I will say that with taxes, there's so many more opportunities open to us. I think the biggest thing is that back like a number of years ago, I was the guy doing the visa runs, in and out of Thailand and different places. I was the guy, pushing the boundaries a little bit. And I think the difference is now, and what I'm trying to kind of help educate people a little bit more on, is that don't get me wrong, if you're going to be in a country for a small period of time, you don't need to be spending tens of thousands on tax advisors. It's a waste of money. But what I will say is that certain countries are getting much stricter. Certain countries are recognizing that, take the UK as one example amongst others. They obviously, with remote work, have seen a whole ton of people leave the UK and go back to work remotely with their family in Spain or in Germany or in Japan or wherever it is. And guess what's after happening simultaneously? There's a whole bunch of remote workers that have started working remotely to party in London for a couple of weeks or months or whatnot. And I think the big thing I would say is, well, twofold. First of all, don't put your head in the sand in this stuff. Don't put your head in the sand. Think it through. Try and educate yourself. Even just looking on Google, whatever you can. There's a lot of resources that are very helpful out there. And the second thing is that, especially if you work for a company, talk through with your boss or your manager or HR team first. I saw a really post recently from somebody that said, "Oh, I just became a digital nomad, and I said it to my manager, and I didn't tell anybody else. The company told me to come back, and I just ignored them. And after a while, they were fine." And I think that kind of behavior is a serious risk for companies, because what's going to happen is that in the for 2022 are based on 2021, when COVID and residency was pretty relaxed. But the tax audits for 2023 are going to be based on 2022, when people had to have their policies in place. So I think, especially if you work in certain types of roles, like sales generating roles, senior roles, IP generating roles, anything involved in contracts, that's the major risks, which is essentially what you call permanent establishment or corporation tax risk. That's when, let's say you're doing $1 million or $2 worth of sales for your company in a year, and you decide to go work remotely in the south of France for 6 months, and you trigger that risk. Well, guess what? The French tax authorities can now all of a sudden grab a bunch of the corporation tax that you've actually generated. So I think the most important thing is, especially if you work for a company, try and work with your company to do it in a way that, if you're smart, you can still get to where you need to get to for the most part, but you can do it in a way that's not going to land you in really serious trouble.
John, are you referring to working for a company as being their employee with a contract, or being a sole trader and then just generating, issuing
There's
invoices?
no doubt. Yeah, if you're working as an employee, it's a bigger risk for the company. But even if you're working as a contractor, you've got a contractor misclassification risk, for example. That even if the legal term is that you're a contractor, but if you're essentially working as an employee, in some countries, especially look at the UK with IR35, they will look at that as essentially an employee-company relationship. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it, when it comes to corporation tax, without trying to get too technical here, you've got a thing called agency permanent establishment. That's where, even if you're a contractor, if essentially you're acting as an agent for the company in that country, you can trigger that risk. So I don't like, waving about big flags of, oh, watch out for these tax risks, but it's just about being smart and just trying to do the research. And I think a lot of companies are going to find out painfully the hard way in 2023 that they should have actually been more clued into this. So I think, just if you can at all, just try and have a little bit of research done. But ultimately, that's down to primarily the company's responsibility. That's not down to you, employee, or you as a digital nomad. I mean, at the end of the day, if they're letting you do it and they're not doing the research, that's, in a way, that's not your problem. What you've got to certainly watch out for is your own personal tax situation, that you don't trigger it for yourself as an individual.
Very useful information. That's amazing, especially now with all the remote work. Like it's becoming more and more of a thing that people are trying to find information about taxes and finances. Both of these topics we're touching these, as important aspects. Now, since there's a lot of interest about families and how families are traveling, questions just today about families traveling. I would love to get the last few minutes to talk about that. Shlomo, if you can bring us a perspective of, what are the struggles and how do you manage to travel with your family, and also, how do you organize, like, what any suggestions for families who are traveling? What should they be aware of, in their finances?
Well, well, first of all, it's more expenses. That's the bottom line. But putting this aside, let's first talk about, kind of the way that I can talk about our day to day. So when we are moving to a new place, there are the basics of just getting uh, flights, first few days of, just managing, maybe an Airbnb, and then probably starting to find something which is a more of a longer term. We usually try to stay no, no less than, let's say, 3 weeks, 4 weeks in a place. So it's more of a slow mad kind of lifestyle, even more if we can. We tend to now go to more places where there are homeschooling communities because we homeschool. So that also keeps our lifestyle because we're able to travel also in the school year. Um, and the day to day is basically the same as we have here in Israel when we travel. So my wife and I split the time about half the day each. So one parent is with the girls and the other is working, either in where we're staying or finding a co-working space or going to a coffee shop or any of that. So this is basically how we handle this. Sometimes we find different programs. So we might go to Bulgaria in the winter. There is a world schooling program there for a few months, so we hope to be there. So that's more fun for the kids and more entertaining, and also kind of, it's still, they're all homeschooling communities, so it's kind of the same vibe, the same mindset. So we love those. And if not, then it's also finding what what to do with the kids. So we go to museums, we go traveling, we go hiking, we do different things. It's more of an active thing, but this is also pretty similar to what we do in Israel. So it really depends where.
Thank you so much. That's good to know, because I was on a panel and they asked about family. I'm like, I'm not the right person to ask about it. Like,
Bring in the
come on.
questions.
Yeah. So how about you, John? Like, how do you manage the whole, setup of traveling with family? Because, and by the way, both of you, like, do you have a destination? That was one of the questions that I remember. Like, what is one of the destinations that you recommend? You already mentioned Bansko, Shlomo, but
Yes.
feel free to let the attendees know what are some of the destinations that you could recommend for digital
There's
nomads.
one more.
So
Is in
yeah,
south of
John,
Spain. There's one called La Herradura. Sorry, John.
La Herradura.
No, you feel
Yes,
free to go ahead. I'm going to share some resources in the chat just while you're doing that. 1 second, some helpful resources.
La Herradura in south of Spain. So we've been there too. There is also a homeschooling community there and co-working spaces and things like that. Oh, John is much more ready than me
He's
with the
got them all
resources.
set. He's just firing them away. Love it.
Yeah, what I've done is I've just shared with a couple of different resources. First of all, in terms of solutions, because a lot of people that are tuning in, some of them are very experienced digital nomad families. They know what they're doing, but a lot of people that are just diving into this for the first time, I've shared some resources like, for example, Working Without Borders. They do some really interesting remote work vacation trips for digital nomad families in Costa Rica, for example. Boundless Life there in Sintra and in Greece, for example. They allow people to just dive in for 2 or 3 months, for the kids are getting the local education, but they're also getting remote work or digital nomad community, for example, and get to experience a really, really interesting place for a limited period of time. For example, 2 or 3 months, that is absolutely doable for a lot of people. So they're a great way to kind of dig into it and dive into it for just a little bit. Then you've got, for example, some resources where we had 2 episodes of Work From Anywhere series that we do where we discussed these specific topics. They were very, very interesting episodes as well. And the last one then is Hope Patterson. She's a very, very interesting person to follow. She's a great connector. There's great content on kids' education and whatnot as well. But there's plenty more. I'm sure Shlomo might have a few others as well. For me, the one when it comes to, let's say, when it comes to kids and digital nomad families, is start with the intercultural aspect of it. For me, because there's a huge, huge, huge difference between countries that are welcoming of kids, particularly for young kids, and those that are not. And it's nice to experience all different types of cultures, 100%. But for me, especially if you have kids below, 10 years of age, I've got 3 below 5. It's heavy duty. Going to Thailand where they welcoming of kids. It's really easy to find,
They are same
daycare, creche or
experience.
whatnot. You go to like a restaurant, they'll take your kids and play with them while you're having your dinner. I can connect with my wife. That is invaluable. Same in Portugal as well. Very friendly, very welcoming of kids, whereas, for example, other cultures, much less so. They're much more individualistic. They're much more, we're here to work, we're here to, they're a bit of an inconvenience. So the difference in the freedom and the quality of life that gives you as a parent is interesting. And there are data points. People don't even know this. There are data points, intercultural models where you can compare how, family orientation of different countries all around the world. So that's an interesting one that people are only beginning to kind of scratch the surface of.
There's an interesting project called Kibbutz Life, and this is I've seen a couple doing that in Bansko. I've met them, and they have I put the link there, and they are doing a chain of eco villages around the world, and the kids can move from one place to another, and they keep going with the curriculum for the year. So it's kind of a moving school for them. So I don't know how far they are, but I think they're starting. I think the first place is Costa Rica, actually. Also, I think that they mentioned. I
That's
also
a
had
good
the
one.
same
I haven't
experience
heard of
with
them actually.
Thailand. Yeah, maybe you can reach out. So Thailand was a wonderful experience. Portugal as well. We actually been to many of the same places. What else? We had very good, very good experience in Sri Lanka as well. We sent our daughter to a local kindergarten for 3 or 4 weeks, and that was an amazing experience just to really get to know the people there. It's not tourist life; it's real life, real village life, and that was a wonderful experience. Another experience, we were at their New Year's time, which is around April. So we're invited by a couple and their 2 daughters. Again, amazing experience. We spent 3 days with them. So generally speaking, when you have kids, people are very welcoming. It actually helps the parents making even more connections. So it's really good experience. We really love it.
And there's just 2 other ones I wanted to resource. You're probably going to shoot me for having so many different links in there.
No,
But
this is extremely amazing. Like I think this can be so useful for everyone.
The last 2 ones I want to share is Furry Nomad, very interesting tax residency tracker for digital nomads. Very, very good. And the other aspect of it, everyone knows Nomad List. I'd highly recommend them. Another one is Nomad and ask tax specific questions. And it's the community trying to help each other out as well. So Nomad List also have a Slack channel as well. You can go into and ask questions, stuff like that as well. So, there's a lot of people that have been in this situation before. You can reach out to, very often willing to help.
Amazing. This is perfect resources. I'm gonna take the final remarks right now, but before that, like any attendees that have any other questions, feel free to type them in the chat box. And in the meantime, I'd love to get from you, Shlomo, any final remarks, final tips, suggestions, anything that you want to share with the attendees regarding finances while working remotely.
So I really think that I spoke with someone the other day, and I showed him the process. I talked with him about the roadmap, and he's like, wow, I really see the value in this. And he was kind of really intrigued. And it's like, but I'm not going to do it now. And I'm like, question mark on my face. So the thing is this, it's almost never, let's say this, urgent dealing with your finances. It's always we can do it tomorrow. Okay, but by thinking long term and really dealing with it today, you're basically going to save and make much more money throughout your life just by doing this, just by dealing with it. By keeping postponing it, you're keeping yourself on the hamster wheel thinking, oh, am I doing okay, am I not doing okay? Not to mention the financial part, it's also the energy behind it. You probably want to feel like, I'm okay, I'm good, I'm at the right trajectory. That's where it should lead you.
Thank you so much. That's very on point. I'm sure everyone has been in that process, because it's like there's a lot of question marks. Like, am I on the right path?
It's always tomorrow, and yeah, I think people doing a big mistake. Yeah.
Very true. You're true. You're right. How about you, John? What are the final remarks? What are the final tips, suggestions, whether it is about taxes or generally about digital nomad lifestyle, that you could share with the attendees, or if you could suggest and recommend?
So, okay, the thing I would say honestly is there are a ton of resources out there. You know, you don't spend tens of thousands on tax advisors all the time. In fact, very often you can completely avoid it in some cases, depending on the scenario. But the places I would look at, Google. There's a ton of resources there. I've already shared a ton of them. Going into communities like Nomad List and many others, for example, a ton of resources, other people who can recommend, here's a good tax advisor I found. Or likewise, you know, I'm not a huge fan of Facebook. I don't use it all, but going to Facebook groups, for example, or searching for expat tax advisors, for example. If you search for them, you know, you speak to 2 or 3, you'll begin to be able to get a sense of actually how much it actually costs if you need to get tax advice. And really important with tax advisors, split it between 2 things. One is like, A, do I have a risk? Just tell me yes or no, have I got a risk here? And secondly, is the execution of what you do about the risk. Sometimes going to tax advisors, we say, oh, please solve all my problems, and they'll charge a huge amount. But if you can just go to them with a very narrow scope and say, I just want you to tell, based on this scenario, whether I have a risk, and if so, what risk it is, that's much narrower scope of work that tax advisors can usually charge a lot less for. And then, of course, what you do about it, well, it really depends on all the different scenarios after that. But already, the point I'm trying to make is you can really manage your costs when it comes to dealing with tax advisors to try and, basically manage the other side of it, which is the finance side that Shlomo was so good at managing as well.
Can you hear me, guys?
Yeah, I can hear you, Shlomo. Yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure that Erkan is here still.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think Aaron maybe he just froze for a second, but I hope hope that's helpful for any of the attendees who have any questions. Feel free to
Yes, we're here for answering questions on the chat.
Yeah,
if you have. Wow, that's a lot of resources. Very, very helpful.
Yeah,
I'm definitely going to look into those.
I'm curious, Lumbo, what's the favorite country you've ever been to?
That's a good question.
It's like asking what your favorite child is. I know it's
yeah.
impossible.
So I haven't been with the family in Patagonia yet, but it's definitely one of my favorite places. But I did that many years ago, so that's definitely one of those. And I love Thailand as well. Being in Chiang Mai for two months there, 2.5 months there, was absolutely great. You know, every country has its flavor, and many people eventually many nomads eventually choose Portugal. It's not the first time I'm hearing about like nomads choosing a base in Portugal. It makes sense.
Yeah,
it just makes
sense.
sense.
Yeah. That's exactly it. Like having, you can still travel around quite a bit. Funny you say Argentina. I love Bariloche. Bariloche is one of my favorite parts of the world. Yeah, really, really beautiful. Really like into nature. You're close to the water. A beautiful kind of mountain range. Yeah, great memories there. Thailand as well. See, no, we can't actually hear you, Erkan. Give him a second. I see he's reaching out as well. Give him a minute to come back in.
Sure.
But yeah, also Bali as well. But then there are a lot of the obvious places. But it's trying to figure out where the next places that are going to be very, very big. Another place that I really enjoyed was
Natalia.
Where?
I've heard about Natalia. I heard about Natalia. Hello.
Haven't. No. Hey, Erkan, you're back.
Can you hear me? I think I had some. Sorry, I had some technical issues here, but
no problem.
We like the conversation here.
Don't worry. No, I was hearing you. I don't know why mine was not working. So yeah, I think we're ready to wrap things up. I want to thank you guys so much for joining me in this session. It was such a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for these extremely valuable tips and insights and resources, John. This is extremely helpful. Family and taxes and different aspects that you shared. Honestly, there's a lot of resources there. But my favorite was the way you decided on the destination. That's something that I think there's a lot for people to learn about. Doing their research properly. And I know a lot of people say like it's so hard to figure it out and everything, but this sets a great example of, that you can actually do it and get a thorough research before you decide on the destination. So thank you so much, both. And
Thank you.
I would just want to remind to our attendees that you can go to the booths to find out more information about the exhibitors. Make sure to attend the other panels too, because we're taking 2 of our attendees to one of the winner destinations. So the more you watch panels and you join the networking sessions and you go to the booths, you're going to earn points and you're going to be able to win those trips. So thank you so much, and see you in the next one.
Thank you.
Super.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Erkan.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
See ya.
Thanks. See ya.